So a couple years ago, I made a large maple slab desk, and I had to cut that slab down a little bit so it made more sense to be a desk. And this is that offcut from that larger slab. I've held on to it just waiting for something to come up, and today's the day I'm going to turn it into a console table, and it's going to go up in our living room. So as I flip this thing over, I notice it's got one heck of a warp. It's twisted, it's got a little bit of a cup in it. So first things first, let's get some shims under all of these corners to make sure it's nice and secure on my outfeed table so I can flatten it with my router jig. And if you haven't seen my router jig for flattening slabs, I'll put a little link up there in the top right corner and you can go check that out, because that's what I'm going to be using to flatten this slab. So now that I've got everything squared away with this slab on the outfeed table, I can then go get all of the parts and pieces of my jig, 2 rails and a gantry, and I noticed something right here. I'm a little high centered there. My rails are not tall enough for the gantry to slide across this slab, so woodworking is all about problem solving, so I went and grabbed some 3/4 inch scraps and put it underneath each of those rails just to raise up my gantry, just so I had that clearance so I could slide my router back and forth freely. So then I needed to clamp everything down on the table, make sure nothing was going to get wonky on me, and because I added these Bessie squeeze clamps to the side, I needed to make sure that they weren't putting any kind of weird flex in those rails. Oh, and by the way, if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and do that. All right, now I'm checking both of those rails, like I said, and I don't see any light peeking through. That's a great thing. So everything is looking flat, and I am now ready to make a huge mess in the shop with a flattening bit. What flattening bit? This Astra-coated Whiteside 6220 from Bits and Bits. It's a 2-inch surfacing bit, and it likes to eat. So after a couple passes, I clean up a little bit, and then I am able to remove those 3/4 inch scraps that are raising up those side rails. And then I can lower my whole rig, jig, router sled, whatever you want to call it, lower it down to my outfeed table, and then I still have plenty of clearance for the router to slide. So I'm going to flip it over, check to see how flat we are, and it's looking pretty good there. So then I can get to flattening the other side of this. Just gonna double check with my long straight edge, see where I need to start, and it looks like I need to start in the middle. And it's back to making a mess. But check out this surfacing bit. It can eat through this maple. I mean, it was no problem, and it was pretty easy for it. So I'm double checking here. Are we flat? It's looking pretty good this way. Looking pretty good that way. Good this way. Yep. Good on this side. Yeah. So I need to just rough sand everything, just get all those tool marks off. And I'm not really going to pay a whole lot of attention to sanding just yet. Just getting those tool marks off. Now this is the point where I wanted to shape this front half with this cut saw extreme shaping disc. This is the coarse version. I'll have a link in the description below. But I didn't like the way that that front just had this straight cut off. I guess that was from the Sawyer, but I wanted to shape this up to make it look a little bit more like the rest of the live edge. So I kind of just winged it, you know? So after I was done shaping, I wanted to fill in some of these little bitty voids and cracks and checks just on this is actually the bottom side, so it's not super pivotal, but I wanted to fill them in regardless, and I'm using some Starbond thick and then just hitting it with that accelerator spray so that it hardens almost instantly. And then it was back to sanding. And again, I'm not really paying much attention to sanding here. I'm just knocking down all of the high spots that are created from that hardened CA glue, which is really just a fancy name for super glue. Then I went to town with a nice little rasp file just to clean up some more stuff there. And it was time to then put a nice straight edge on the back side of this top. So I just marked one out real quick and then grabbed my track saw and made probably 6 passes, maybe even 7, I don't remember, but I just had to make really small bites to chew through this 2-inch thick slab. And whew, once I got through, it was well worth it. Nice and straight. So with the top basically at a stopping point, I moved on to working on the base. And I had this old poplar Kentucky horse farm fencing just sitting on my rack, just waiting for me to use. So I decided I was going to cut this up, and I just put a real quick straight edge on one side with the table saw just to get a smaller stock size that I could then run over my jointer, which I'll be doing right now. And if you haven't seen, I upgraded my joiner knives not very long ago. I'll leave a link to that video up there in the top right also. But once I got the faces all nice and flat, I then edge jointed the one side, and I'm going to double check and make sure we are square, and it is looking really nice, which means I could then move over to the planer, which also I just upgraded these knives to a helical head. So if you want to check out that video, I'll also put a card up there. So with all of those boards now the same thickness, I could then put the final dimension to each board, rip them down to 3 inches wide, and then take them over to the miter saw and cut them up to be the correct sizes to make the base of this slab table. So I've got 4 pieces each there. Next, it was time to mark out all of my layout lines for the domino mortises, because I will be using the domino to attach these base pieces together. You could use dowels, pocket screws, just glue. It doesn't really matter, but I decided to do dominoes. And here you see me laying everything out, and you may be wondering to yourself, wait a minute, are you doing that right? Anyways, here I am cutting out the mortises of all the dominoes, and you see I'm just using a clamp here on my outfeed table, nothing fancy. And right here, this is when I discovered that I may have got ahead of myself. Hold the tape. Do you see it? Am I gonna just join all of these boards together to make one long continuous board? No. I'm an idiot. I didn't cut the mortises on the face of the long boards. Well, you win some, you lose some. Let's keep going. So off camera, I recut those mortises, and you can see them there. They are now on the face of the long boards. But now I am going to be gluing up these 4 pieces. Luckily, this is just a piece that's going to be in my house, and you won't even see those extra mortises that I cut on the end grain of those boards, because it's on the top side and bottom side of those. So you won't even know unless I told you. So I've got the clamps on now, and we are going to let those dry up here for a little bit, but I'm using some quick and thick, so it won't take too long in the clamps. And then once they're out of clamps, I could give it a quick sand on all those joints to make sure everything is nice and flush. And once that is done, we can then move on to drilling some holes. Now, I would normally use some threaded inserts in this application, but I went and checked, and I was fresh out, and I didn't want to wait on an order, so I came up with a new method. I'm going to be using an 1.25" Forstner bit, drilling just a little bit down into that to make a recessed hole. And then I'm gonna grab a 1/2 inch twist bit to make an oversized hole in the middle there so that I can use a washer and screw combination and still allow for wood movement. I'll clear that up later on in the video here. But then I can move on. I'm just gonna put a really simple little round over on everything and just use some mineral spirits and wipe everything down, get it nice and cleaned up, to then go on to my next step of painting the base. Yes, I'm going to be spray painting this base, a flat black Rust-Oleum spray can, just rattle can, nothing special. This is going to be matching my already existing coffee table, which has a black metal base, and I figured poplar is not really crazy grain, so spray paint was perfect. While the base was drying, I grabbed my shaping disc, the fine version from Kutzall, and just knocked down all of that bark off of the live edge, made sure it was nice and smooth to touch, and just, you know, kind of made it look a little bit more uniform all the way around. I will say though, it's a pretty messy job. Next up was sanding again, and I went through all the grits this time, but I will spare you watching me do all that. Just know I spent a lot of time sanding. Once I finished sanding, I grabbed my bases, which still need another coat of that good old rattle can, but I wanted to see where they needed to go on this slab top. This is the bottom, so they're actually in the right place. But once I figured out where they needed to go, I then marked it with a pencil on both sides, just so I kind of had a relative idea when I was going to finally mount them. And then it was time to finish the top. I'm using Odie's oil. And like I said earlier, this is going to be matching the already existing coffee table I have in our living room, which I used Odie's oil on. So I figured it would only be right to use the same finish. And it's really easy to apply. A little bit goes a long way, and I like to use a white Scotch-Brite pad to apply it. Just rub it in all over the place. Nice and easy. It's pretty mindless finish, really. I mean, if anybody can wipe something down, you can apply this finish. It's very easy, and I really do love how it turns out. So after it sits for about an hour, I come back and buff off all the excess with a nice clean cloth, and it is looking pretty nice. So here I'm attaching the legs, and I'm just using some screws with some flat fender washers. They are 1 1/4 inch, so they fit perfect in those holes. But if you notice, there is some wiggle room for wood movement. See right there? There's plenty of space. This slab shouldn't move more than 1/8 of an inch either way when it's contracting and expanding during the seasons. And there is plenty of that room inside of those oversized holes. So then it was done. That was pretty much it. I could flip it over, kind of get a final look of how it's gonna sit, and it looks great. So that was the table I'm replacing. Here it is in its final home. It's looking good. I love all of that spalted maple, the crotch grain. There's a little bit of figure. It looks great. We really do love it in this space. So thanks for watching. Really appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed, consider hitting that subscribe button. Don't forget to turn on the notifications and give me a thumbs up while you're over there. All right, guys, we'll see you in the next one.